Did you forget? My unpleasant looks and history of nothing but bad luck sums up my life. I was set up by a colleague and got demoted, and my newlywed wife ran away from me too. The one laughing at my situation is my attractive boss at this new demoted post. Frozen like a deer in headlights, she whispered to me. It was my first time. Confused by her unexpected words, I was. My name is Timothy Sullivan. I'm 28 years old. I work at an event planning company. I just got married actually, and I am no longer a single man. With that new resolve, I thought I had my act together. But then, an unbelievable incident occurred. Who ordered the champagne for tomorrow's event? We don't have enough. Aren't you misspelling the digit? My boss's roaring voice echoes across the floor. Speaking of tomorrow's event, it's one I'm in charge of. It's an event to enjoy champagne and wine at a park in the city. I was the sub-leader for that event. Let me check the order form. As I rushed towards my boss, he frowned at me. He has a hard time dealing with me. It's often said that appearance matters for 80% of first impressions. Unfortunately, I was born with a rather menacing look. Apparently, people always seem to think I look angry. To add to that, I grew taller than one would prefer. My boss finds me intimidating due to my imposing presence. And now, I was approaching to him with a desperate form. For a moment, my boss seemed ready to bolt. There was my signature on the order form. But I didn't check this document before. Initially, I was removed from ordering the champagne. I was at a loss for words. One of my seniors on the team, smirking, called out to me. You messed up big time, didn't you? What are you going to do? Despite the critical situation, he was grinning from ear to ear. That's when it hit me. I remembered that the person in charge of ordering was my senior. My senior and boss began to whisper amongst themselves. This was not a good sign. My senior is likable and had good standing with our boss. My boss sees me differently than others as he dislikes me. I checked with Robert. Timothy, it's your mistake after all. My boss, face red with anger, grabbed my collar. It was to be expected. This was the biggest event of the season. It's not me. I was removed from the wine team. No one cared to listen to my words. Robert kept smirking, looking at me. If he has time to laugh, he should do something. The event is tomorrow, so I decided to start calling all the wholesale liquor companies. No matter how much I say it's not my fault, everything will be blamed on me. I almost let out a sigh, but there was no time for that. I had to do as much as I could in the limited time. By the early morning of the event, all the champagne had arrived. I truly believe it was a miracle. A manufacturer I had a good relationship with had inquired to liquor companies outside the town for me. People who understand, understand. This phrase, which I have been repeating since my college days, I murmured like a mantra in my mind. Exhausted and dozing off at my desk, I could sense my colleagues coming in one after another. Everyone was amazed to see the delivered champagne. In my drowsy state, I heard Robert's voice. If I handle it, it's as easy as this. I can fix the stupid mistakes of my juniors overnight. He must not have noticed me, dozing off, face down. He talked proudly, as if he had solved everything by himself. My colleagues also expressed their admiration, as expected. With his charming looks, eloquent speech, and pleasant demeanor, I thought again that Robert was indeed successful in life. Are you sleeping while Robert is working hard? Suddenly, I was pulled by the back of my neck and jolted awake. My boss was holding my collar, his face distorted with anger. I was immediately taken to the director's office. Apparently, I was going to be held accountable for this oversight. I felt thoroughly annoyed looking at the smug face of Robert in the corner of my eye. Demotion. What was communicated to me in the director's office was a transfer to a rural branch. In other words, a demotion. But I just got married. This is troublesome. My voice came out involuntarily. I've only been married for 6 months, and my wife is working too. She would also be troubled by a sudden transfer. Do I look like I care about your personal problems? Reflect on the harm you were about to cause the company at your new location. Fix that attitude too. My boss was now calling the new location my demotion openly. A transfer order was thrown at me. The destination was a small branch in a seaside town. I've been demoted from my subleader position as well. My salary will likely decrease accordingly. After leaving the director's office, I immediately sent a message to my wife. I didn't have the courage to tell her directly. However, she didn't reply immediately. A week after that incident, I found myself in the town of my demotion. It was near the sea, with the scent of the tide in the air. In the end, my wife left me. Just 6 months into our marriage, she made it clear to me when I got demoted. She couldn't quit her job, and she married me because I was earning well. It seems I'm no longer needed, as I've lost that value. I heard later that she had been involved with someone else before our marriage. My demotion was a convenient excuse for her to leave. You never know what life will throw at you. And now, at this new workplace, I have to start from scratch. The first time I showed up at work, everyone looked at me as if they were terrified. A towering man of 6'7" with a harsh gaze just sluggishly appeared. I knew their reaction was justified, but it still hurt. I may look intimidating, but I'm not one for fights. I can't boast about my strength, and I hate conflicts. Apparently, I seem cold to others, and they tend to keep their distance from me. This has been the case since my student days, and it hasn't changed since I started working. Those who get to know me well trust me, but few people make it that far. The new office clerk is a young girl, and she seems to be constantly scared of me. My other colleagues also treat me like I'm a delicate, touchy subject. There was only one person who treated me without any discrimination. That was the branch manager, Miss Lisa Richardson. She was an astonishingly beautiful woman. I was so stunned at first that I just stared at her. She always has her long hair loosely tied up and wore heels. Her lipstick was always red. She looked both pure and strong. 2 beauty spots lined up under her left eye, and when she smiled, her eyes narrowed in a way that was really charming. On top of that, she was a perfect beauty who was great at her job. She was particularly kind to me. I'm not being conceited. She really was especially kind to me. If I was eating alone, she would always invite me into the lunch group. If I was quiet, she would bring up various topics, trying to bridge the gap between me and the other colleagues. With her help, I quickly adapted to the workplace. It became more comfortable for me than the main office. People are not as they appear, she would tell our coworkers and people in the community while introducing me. In this rural setting, it's essential to build relationships with the local residents. From small to large events, our company seemed to handle almost all of them. And the office clerk told me that every group we worked with became a regular customer. Recently, I've even received fish from a local lady or dishes for dinner. In return, I get asked to do various things, like cleaning high places or changing light bulbs. For the summer dance festival, we're counting on you to take the lead, Timothy, Lisa said to me once I'd really settled into the local community. It appears to be conducted in collaboration with local elementary schools and community associations. I would probably be interacting with even more people than I am now. I wondered, can I really handle such a crucial role? I wondered if I could handle such an important role. I'm anxious about making a bad impression on people I meet for the first time. I don't want to put my coworkers, who have been so kind to me, in a tough spot. It was those colleagues who encouraged me when I was unable to respond right away. It's all right, we've got your back, they all reassured me. I had never been treated so gently before, and I almost found myself tearing up. It's all thanks to Lisa. When I look at her, she's perched irreverently on a desk, legs crossed, smiling. The heel caught on her toes, swaying, left a strong impression. Lisa usually appears prim and proper, but sometimes odd gaps in her character show. She can be surprisingly rough around the edges, or use crude language. Even though low heels would make her work easier, she always wears high stilettos. But these heels look cooler, don't they? That was a response when I asked why, and it somehow felt familiar, but I couldn't recall where I heard it before. As the day of the dance festival was around, the office began to bustle. One day, a local police officer from the substation attached to the office dropped by. He was deeply engrossed in a conversation with Lisa. Overhearing their discussion, it seemed there was some suspicious people around recently. There was an incident where a grade schooler was approached by a man with a sinister look, who tried to get the child into his car. As soon as I heard sinister look, I knew I was the one under suspicion. Lately, I've been helping local elementary school kids build floats for the parade. Apparently, some of the parents have named me as the unsavory-looking man. Just as I was sighing in exasperation, a man burst into the office with a force that seemed to kick the front door open. He was the president of the elementary school's parent-teacher association. As soon as he spotted me, he approached. You're preying on the children under the pretense of preparing for the dance festival. You're the worst person. He yelled at me and grabbed my collar. It seems his daughter got hurt. She had a scraped knee yesterday. He was treating me like a complete pervert. He continued to berate me for being ill-natured, unfriendly, and unmarried. I had nothing to say to him. Arguing back in situations like this is futile. I decided to stay silent. Officer, if you're here, arrest this man immediately. The president twisted my arm and tried to thrust me at the officer in the back. With such a strong force twisting my arm, I couldn't help but let out a cry of, "Ouch!" In an instant, the president's hand was knocked away with a great force. The one who knocked it away was Lisa. While glaring at the president, she tried to hide me behind her back. There was a height difference between us, so I was not hidden at all. "What do you think you're doing to my subordinate? Stop making unfounded accusations without any evidence." The firmness and conviction in Lisa's words seemed to overwhelm the president. At the time his daughter was supposedly harmed, I was at the float-making site, surrounded by a bunch of kids. Lisa and other colleagues were at the site too. Even so, this man with his criminal-looking appearance. The president kept ranting despite the odds turning against him, making Lisa lose his cool. I believe judging people by their looks is questionable. Just then, from the entrance of the municipal office, we could hear the children's voices saying, "That's right. It's not right." It seemed they were worried about me not showing up for the float-making time and came to the office to fetch me. The children explained my innocence to the president in earnest and started crying, asking him not to bully me. At this, even the president seemed utterly perplexed and scratched his head. "I'm sorry, I lost my cool." He immediately bowed his head and apologized to me. The children looked up at me. I gave them a reassuring smile and said, "It's okay." They seemed relieved, stopped crying, and started to smile. We made up. They seemed happy. That evening, the real culprit was quickly arrested. The culprit was a young man from the next town over who bore a striking resemblance to me. "Why did you stand up for me? I could have been the criminal, you know." When we were left alone due to overtime work, I asked Lisa. I appreciated that she believed in me, but there was a feeling that she understood everything about me that was deeply intriguing. What did she know about me? I wondered. Maybe she was a bit inclined to pick a fight. Suddenly being faced with my baseless accusation, Lisa stared at me, dumbfounded. Then, she broke into a gentle smile. With her heels clicking, she made her way over and stood next to my desk. "Did you really forget about me?" She leaned in and whispered, causing my heart to race. Lisa reached out and propped up my chin. She looked straight into my eyes. "It was my first time. Will you remember if I do this?" Slowly, her hands reached out towards my petrified face. Instinctively, I squeezed my eyes shut. The next moment, my cheeks were being pulled with an unbelievable force. What are you doing?" My words were distorted as my cheeks were being pulled from both sides. Lisa chuckled. "Come on, remember it." As she said this, she extended her hand in front of me. A large silver ring was on a finger that was usually bare. The moment I saw it, my memory center kicked into high gear. "This ring. What, this ring? It's the one I gave you, right?" Lisa watched me, grinning at my surprise. This ring was my first gift for a girl. When I was still in middle school, I frequently visited a bookstall where a girl worked. Though I say girl, she must have already been in college. The first time I saw her in the bookstore, I was surprised by how beautiful she was. While I was frequenting the bookstore just to see her, I noticed she was being avoided by the other employees. Perhaps I noticed it because I was facing similar isolation at school. When I listened to the conversations between the employees, it seemed the reason was simply because she was beautiful. Just petty jealousy among women. Short black hair and multiple piercings. Her nails were always painted black. Apparently, they didn't like her style. I thought about how tough it all must be for her. One day, right before closing, I really wanted to read a book, so I dashed into the bookstore. In the corner of the nearly closed shop, she was crouched down looking for something. Are you looking for something? I mustered up my courage and spoke to her, which seemed to surprise her as she stood up. Her eyes, filled with tears as she looked at me, are an image I still remember. It made my heart pound. I lost my ring. Indeed, the silver ring she usually wore was missing from her finger. She told me it was a gift from her brother. There was no one else in the store. Silently, I crouched down on the floor and started to help her look for it. In the end, we didn't find the ring. She bowed her head to me and thanked me. I was frustrated that we couldn't find it, but I was happy to have shared that time with her. The next day, when I went to the bookstore, she was not there, and the usual group that spoke ill of her was. I was speechless at what the leader of the group was loudly boasting about. She was proudly talking about how she had thrown the girl's silver ring into the river. Apparently, the leader's boyfriend fell for the girl and that was the cause. Talk about spiteful. Feeling sorry for her after she searched so hard, I spent all my savings and bought a ring for the first time in my life. Later, when she was at the cash register, I slipped the ring onto her finger in the midst of the chaos. I clearly remember that I was so flustered that I put it on her left ring finger. Her surprised face with wide eyes, and the face of Lisa, who is laughing in front of me now, overlap in my memory. You were the first one to put a ring on my left ring finger, Timothy. Lisa apparently noticed me at the company induction ceremony. She found out my department, my name, and while she thought of speaking to me someday, many years passed by. When it was decided that I was to be transferred here, she was so delighted that she even danced a little jig. No way. I became somewhat embarrassed and couldn't look at Lisa's face. But one thing became clear to me. Having been judged based on my appearance and feeling hurt by it, I realized that she understood my feelings. She had been sympathizing with me all along. So, is this ring valid? Or was it just a coincidence? Lisa tells me that after that, I became too embarrassed to go to the bookstore, but she had been waiting for me all along. I was surprised when you crawled around on the floor so earnestly looking for the ring for her. Ever since then, I've been concerned about you. I couldn't recognize Lisa, who had a completely different atmosphere from her student days. But talking like this, she hasn't changed at all from that time. Of course, it's valid. Lisa grinned satisfactorily at my response. I guess I won't be able to win against her, but I feel like we can be together forever because we understand the same kind of pain. Next time, I'll propose with a proper ring. I make the declaration while shyly looking away. Lisa bursts into laughter and says, "I'm looking forward to it." What did you think of that? Subscribing the channel would be a great motivation for me to create more content. See you in the next video. I gripped it firmly in my hand. I was torn whether I should really go ahead with it. My eyes turned to the woman in front of me. Her cheeks were blushing and her eyes glistened as she looked at me. Seeing her up close was breathtaking. She was so beautiful. I'm sure she must have steeled herself to be here. If that's the case, I'd like to respond to her wishes, too. Because I felt the same way as she did. So, I pushed it in, all the way. I'll never forget her joy in that moment, for as long as I live. What I'm about to tell you is about a fateful reunion with a woman who used to hate me. I'm James Peterson, a 32-year-old gynecologist working at a hospital. Although I am now steadily gaining experience as a doctor and working well, I actually went a long way to become a doctor. I had 2 failed attempts before I got into med school. Or rather, I didn't take the exam for 2 years. I was in a top-performing class in high school and within the range of getting into a medical school. But on the day of the preliminary exam, My chronically ill mother collapsed. The exam became the least of my concerns, and I didn't go to the exam center. I spent 2 years supporting my mother, who was on the brink of life and death. It might have been a detour, but there's nothing more important than life, so I have no regrets. Sadly, my mother passed away, but I am glad that I could be there for her. I always dreamt of becoming a doctor, and through my mother's battle with illness, my desire became even stronger. So, 2 years later than my peers, I entered medical school. Now, working as a doctor, a woman transferred to my hospital. The beautiful classmate from high school who used to hate me, Amanda, became my patient. Well, it would be more accurate to say that she was always competing with me, rather than hating me. Amanda and I went to the same preparatory school. We were always competing for top grades, and she treated me as a rival on her own accord. I didn't particularly feel that she was a rival, but it is true that competing with her motivated me to study harder. Maybe because she saw me as a rival, she was always tough on me. She often told me, "I will not lose to you," but I admired her competitiveness, which was a stark contrast to my laid-back personality, and I thought it was cool. In high school, I hadn't told anyone except my homeroom teacher why I gave up on the exam. Of course, I didn't tell Amanda either. I couldn't take the exam because my mother was critically ill. It was serious, and I was scared. I was afraid to say it out loud. I didn't want to say my mother was in critical condition. If I said it, the scene of my mother collapsing in front of me would come to my mind. I couldn't bear the sympathetic looks from everyone. But Amanda, not knowing the reason, seemed to think that I had run away before the exam. "You didn't have the confidence, and you ran away. Not even going to the exam site, you're such a coward." She insulted me like that and wouldn't talk to me from then on. She got accepted into a prestigious university. It was the university she had always claimed she would get into since our freshman year of high school. She was honest with her feelings and straightforward. She was hard on herself and others, but she never shied away from making the effort that matched. To me, she seemed dazzling. Who would have thought that Amanda would become my patient? I wonder how she will react. The reunion was a mix of happiness and a bit of fear. I met Amanda when I was shopping at a convenience store before work. She didn't know I was her attending doctor yet, because I hadn't greeted her as such. Also, maybe because I was in my casual clothes, she glared at me the moment she saw me and slightly laughed. "You're a high school grad and sick. Such a loser in life, huh?" It seems that because of my cancellation of the high school exam, I was a loser in her eyes. "I'm your doctor." What are you talking about?" I showed her my name tag, which stated my title as a doctor, to the bewildered her. She was staring at it in a daze. After revealing at the store that I was her doctor, Amanda left the place without saying a word. I went to her room to greet her later, but she didn't say anything. Perhaps she was still angry. She had been diagnosed with ovarian cancer at another hospital and was transferred to my hospital for surgery. The hospital where I work has a good reputation for gynecology and attracts patients from other hospitals for surgery. After examining her condition at this hospital, it seems likely that one of her ovaries will need to be removed. The extent of the progression and the treatment plan after the surgery would be determined. But then, Amanda started saying something completely unexpected. "I'm not going to have surgery." "Excuse me, what did you say?" "Listen carefully, you dummy. I said I'm not having surgery. If you got it, just leave me alone." I explained the importance of the surgery, but she wouldn't listen. I wondered if she didn't like me, so I had other doctors and nurses talk to her about the surgery. But no matter who talked to her, Amanda refused the surgery. And she wouldn't give any reasons. I wanted to respect the patient's wishes, but I wanted her to make a choice that values her life. More than anything, I was concerned that she won't give me a reason. One day, as I was troubled with how to deal with Amanda, I passed by her room and heard arguing voices from inside. "So it's going to be an ovarian removal, huh? We have to call off the engagement." I saw for the first time someone who had come to visit Amanda. He was raising his voice, sounding irritated at the patient. "One of my ovaries will still be left. There won't be any problem. You don't know that for sure. What about the chance of getting pregnant? It's going to be lower than normal, right? Can you even have children? If you can't, there's no point in us getting married. Please, don't say things like that. I'm not going to have the surgery. If I don't, both of my ovaries will remain." "Huh?" A derisive laugh from the man echoed through the hospital room. "So, there won't be a complete cure for the cancer, right? And my wife will be a cancer patient in the first place. That's out of the question. There's only one thing I want from my wife: to bear children that will carry on my superior genes. I heard ovarian cancer can be hereditary. It would be a disaster if our child inherits it." The sound of Amanda's sobbing could be heard. "If you're worried, let's get tested to see if it could be passed on. Just the fact that you have cancer is a huge turnoff. Don't drag me into your illness. You can handle it alone. Damn, I thought I had found a woman with both brains and beauty. You're just defective." I couldn't tolerate a man who didn't even know what the disease was and assumed it was inherited on his own. And the part where he scorned her as defective. What matters now shouldn't be whether his genes survive to the next generation. Isn't her life the most important thing? Even if she wanted children. It is women who bear children. Women risk their lives to give birth. I just couldn't accept that a man who disrespects women was ignoring her like this. "Don't you love me anymore? Please, don't abandon me." In high school, she was dazzling as she worked towards her goals. I admired her. I was angry at the fact that she was crying and hanging on to such a scumbag. Unable to stand it any longer, I entered the hospital room. "Nice to meet you, I'm Dr. Peterson, her primary physician." My sudden entrance seemed to surprise them. "I could hear you all the way from outside. You're not family, are you? If you're not, you should leave." My sharp words clearly irritated the man. "It's quite disrespectful of you. I've taken time out of my schedule for this woman. Even more reason for you to leave. Her valuable time is being wasted talking to you. If you're not idle, you should be on your way." Tisk. The man clicked his tongue, shooting Amanda a glare. "Is it okay if I leave? If I leave, it's really over between us, okay?" His tone seemed to contain a mocking laugh, as if he was making a fool out of Amanda. Watching her cling and cry, he seemed to find amusement. Amanda, her eyes moist, alternated her gaze between the man and me. The usually strong-willed Amanda was nowhere to be seen. That frustrated me. Do you need to cling to this kind of man? The Amanda I know wasn't someone who compromised on herself. I heard you studied a lot and got a job at a good company. You worked just as hard in college, didn't you? You're an amazing person. Marriage is supposed to be a lifelong decision, right? You don't deserve someone who neglects your life and talks about your genes and defects. The man shouted things like you, and you're mocking me, as he listened to my words. Amanda was quietly watching me. Unsuitable, perhaps. Her words sounded younger than Amanda I knew. At this moment, Amanda seemed like a lost child. Maybe she was doubting her path due to the harsh words from the guy. Yeah, he's unsuitable. There should be someone else who will appreciate and cherish a hard worker like you, so don't lower yourself to the level of a scumbag like him. Upon hearing my words, Amanda closed her eyes and took a deep breath. When she opened them again, there were no signs of tears. Her eyes now regained their shine as she stared down at the man. "We're done. Leave now." You sure you want to talk to me like that? I might forgive you if you apologize now." The man's earlier bravado was gone, and it was obvious that he was bluffing. He'd initiated the cruel conversation, but now he was unsettled by her desire to break up. "I've had enough. We're finished. I'm glad I found out how small-minded you are before our marriage." What was I thinking? How did I not notice until now? I can't stand people who look down on the sick, or who see women as mere tools for childbirth. I'm baffled as to what I ever saw in you. Leave right now. The man was speechless, having been chastised by the woman he once looked down upon. I opened the door to the hospital room, gesturing outward with my hand. Then, with a smile, I said, "Please never come back." The man looked frustrated and fled back. With just the two of us in the hospital room, I asked for her permission and took a seat by the bed. "Sorry for eavesdropping and barging in, but that guy, he's an absolute jerk. I couldn't stand it." "Eavesdropping isn't a good hobby, but I'll forgive you. He used to have his gentle moments, but he showed his true colors when I fell ill. Yet, I was already in love with him, shamefully clinging to him. I wonder if my illness weakened me. Did you refuse surgery for his sake?" She nodded slightly. It seemed she thought that if she didn't have her ovaries removed, he would stay by her side. But doing so wouldn't cure her illness. Maybe her mental was also weakened by the illness to the point where she didn't understand that. She laughed self-deprecatingly. "Oh, you've seen an embarrassing side of me. I feel completely exposed." She seemed a bit embarrassed. But it might not be fair that she was the only one whose secret was known. "I've also hidden something. Can I share it with you?" I felt the need to reveal why I didn't take the college entrance exams. I told her about how my mother fell ill, how critical her condition was, and that I had to postpone my exams for 2 years to take care of her. Once I finished, she hit me gently with her pillow. "Why didn't you tell me that? At such a tough time, I accused you of running away, didn't I? That's awful. I didn't want to worry you, so I couldn't say it. I thought getting pity would be painful, too." Saying this, she hit me again with her pillow. It didn't hurt at all, but each hit made a comical sound. "Why should I be considerate of you, my rival? Why won't worry about you? I told you to keep up with me, didn't I? I'll go to college first and work hard so you can't catch up, but I still want you to chase me." At her typical words, I couldn't help but laugh. So, she wouldn't pity me, huh? It seems that I had misunderstood her. From there, we were engrossed in stories from our student days. She, who had been crying in front of her boyfriend until just now, was regaining her energy, occasionally showing anger or laughter. This is the way she should be. Her clinging to such a terrible guy is just not like her. "So, what will you do about the surgery?" She looked at me blankly before laughing defiantly. "Of course, I'm going to do it. I'll get well quickly and work hard again. I worked hard to get into this company. I'm still going to rise to the top." Her competitive spirit came out in her face. Just like her dazzling student days, she's still shining now. The surgery was a success, and the pathology report indicated the cancer could be completely removed, with low malignancy and low risk of metastasis. At her request, genetic testing was done, which showed no genetic risk for cancer. Both she and I were relieved. During her hospitalization, we talked every day, and the distance between us seemed to have closed. I enjoyed the time I spent talking to her outside my working hours. "Bring me a drink in the afternoon. I'd like something sweet tomorrow." She started making demands, and I found her making these small promises adorable. I'm sure I wasn't the only one who found our talks enjoyable. On the day of her discharge, I had prepared flowers for her. As we were leaving the hospital, I handed her the bouquet. Congratulations on your discharge." She looked at the bouquet, then turned her face away with a pout. "Can't you see? My hands are full. I can't carry anymore." "Oh, right." Interpreting her response as a refusal to accept, I felt a bit disheartened. "Because I can't carry it, bring it to my house." Huh. I was still processing what Amanda had just said and stared at her blankly. "What did you just say?" "That's what I said. Since I can't carry it, you bring the flowers to my house." "Well, Amanda, I don't know where your house is." She then placed a piece of paper with something written on it in my pocket. I reached into my pocket and felt the paper. "What's written here?" When I asked, she replied, "My contact and address. You'll need to bring flowers. Call me after work." It seemed that Amanda is willing to see me outside the hospital. I clenched the piece of paper in my hand. I was hesitant about whether I could really keep this in my pocket just like this. While thinking about what to do, I looked at Amanda, who was standing in front of me. She was there, her cheeks turning red, her eyes moist as she looked at me. Surely, she had made up her mind to be here with me. If that's the case, I'd like to respond to her wishes, too. After all, I feel the same way about her. That's why I firmly pushed the paper into the depth of my pocket. "Even if you ask for this back, I won't return it." Hearing my words, she seemed to relax. Perhaps she had been tense as well. I'll probably never forget the joy on her face at that moment for the rest of my life. When I returned to the office and looked at the note, it was written, "Absolutely, you contact me," along with her contact information. I smiled at her characteristic way of making a request. In the evening of that day, after finishing my work, I quickly contacted her and rushed to her house to deliver the bouquet. I hadn't run like that in years. Now, 2 years later, I live with my wife, Amanda. We do fight a lot, but my wife, who still looks pretty and cute when she's mad, makes me happy. All in all, I want to continue cherishing my wife, with both sweet and cool faces, who never fails to pack me a lunch filled with love. I first met her while I was hiking to observe alpine plants, halfway along the descent route towards the cabin where I was planning to stay overnight. She was crouched at the side of the trail, looking unwell. She appeared to be in her late 30s. And she was radiant yet somber, a young widow. Again this week, seriously. My name is James, but around here, they call me Michael Thompson. I work as a researcher of alpine plants at the county museum. For 4 weeks in a row, when I told my wife, Michelle, that I was going alone to the mountains to observe alpine plants over the weekend, she'd reacted hysterically. "It's part of my job, Michelle, there's nothing I can do about it." Back in college, I was part of the athletic club and was invited to go hiking by a senior member. The first mountain I climbed was about 6,500 feet high. I was captivated by a small wildflower known as the Queen of Alpine Plants that I saw at the summit of that mountain. I was fascinated by the small wildflower that had white and pink petals blooming on the rocky ground. Since then, mountain climbing became my hobby, and this passion led me to my job as a researcher of alpine plants. What do you say to Jacob? Jacob is our 6-year-old son. Michelle said that I will take him to the amusement park this weekend, as I've been postponing our promise to him. Why don't you just take him, Michelle? You're the one who told Jacob about the amusement park without asking me. Leaving those words behind, I left the house with my backpack. I planned to stay overnight at the mountain cabin, and I had already submitted my climbing plan. I would get to the trailhead by transferring between trains and buses. Is this what they call going through a rough patch? On my way, I recalled the argument with Michelle. It left a sour taste in my mouth. I arrived at the trailhead just after 9 a.m. While climbing towards the summit, I observed alpine plants. It was just after 3 p.m. On my way to the mountain lodge where I'd reserved a one-night stay, I ran into a woman who was sick. I escorted her back to the lodge and nursed her back to health overnight. After regaining her strength, we parted ways at the trailhead the next day. On a whim, I stopped by a local shop at the foot of the mountain and bought a souvenir, candies, for my wife and son for the first time. "What's this?" When I handed over the mountain treats, my wife, Michelle, looked at me in confusion. I called out to Jacob, who was in his room, telling him I'd brought back a souvenir. Having had his promise of a trip to the amusement park broken, Jacob, sulking, deliberately stomped his feet as he came over. Hoisting Jacob onto my knee, I told him, "I swear I'll take you to the amusement park next weekend, for real this time." "Really, really?" Jacob asked, looking up at me. "I'm not lying." Then, I opened the box of souvenir candies. Just as Jacob reached out his hand, Michelle interjected. "No, you can't. Dinner is almost ready." After dinner, Jacob and I spent a short hour playing video games, took a bath together, and I put him to bed. When I returned to the living room, Michelle was watching the news on TV, seemingly bored. "How about it, want a beer?" I took a can of beer out of the fridge and offered it to my wife. "What's gotten into you? Playing the doting dad all of a sudden, and now trying to be the loving husband." I grabbed 2 glasses and sat down across from my wife. Pouring the beer, I raised my glass for a toast. "There's something I want to tell you. Something I need you to hear." Michelle took a sip of her beer and looked at me. I told her about the woman I met on the way to the mountain lodge, who was in poor health. I thought to myself, she's taking the mountain too lightly, dressed in casual clothes like that. But I couldn't just leave her there. So, I talked to the woman. Whether she was on a tour or lost from her group, she only replied that she came alone. I didn't tell Michelle this, but I was reminded of the look on that woman's face when she looked up at me after answering my questions. With her glossy hair tied back and a certain melancholy in her eyes, I was captivated by her. And then, I had a thought. Alpine plants possess a unique beauty. The higher the altitude they inhabit, the more I perceive their beauty to intensify. I've wondered why this is, especially considering the harsh natural conditions of these high-altitude areas. After all, plants such as flowers perpetuate life by enabling the pollen from male flowers to fertilize the female flowers. This process necessitates the assistance of wind and insects. Wind is a force we can only leave to nature, but insects we can attract. Hence, flowers bloom. The fragrance and beauty of the bloomed flowers serve to attract insects, enlisting them in the process of pollination. I sensed something similar in her, the woman I encountered on my descent route. An allure that draws men towards her unconditionally. She said climbing in such light attire and getting sick, "It's a nuisance, really, causing such a commotion." It's totally true. I considered taking her to the mountain cabin where I was supposed to stay. However, it was nearly an hour's walk from where I found her to the cabin, even just for me alone. "So, what did you do?" my wife asked with keen interest. "Well, I recalled that there was a refuge cabin much closer," I replied. A refuge cabin is a mountain hut available for free to anyone encountering an emergency, such as bad weather. Most refuge cabins are unmanned, with no resident caretakers. And because they're free, some climbers use them as planned accommodation, even when it's not an emergency, which is allowed. I continued my story to my wife. carrying the woman I'd found on the mountain trail. I walked for about 20 minutes and arrived at the refuge cabin. Along the way, the sky had turned ominous, the wind was picking up, and large raindrops began to fall. The cabin was empty. "Well, looks like we're imposing ourselves here tonight." She nodded, arms wrapped around herself. Looking at her, I saw her lips trembling, tinged with purple. "Cold, isn't it? That's what happens when you climb a mountain rest like that." I offered her my mountain jacket that I was wearing. When you go mountain climbing, it's basic to layer your clothing. That way, if it's hot, you can take layers off. If it's cold, you can put them on. Even when I tried to explain the basics of mountain climbing, she was miles away. Then I contacted the mountain hut I had booked, explained the situation, and said we would be staying in the emergency shelter that night. "So what? You're telling me you two were alone together until morning?" Silently, I nodded in response to my wife's question. "Huh, and then?" My wife, Michelle, spat out the words dismissively. "I had brought food, drinks, and cooking utensils to the mountain hut we had booked because we planned to stay without meals. It was a bit scarce for 2 people, but I cooked dinner anyway. The menu was a classic instant curry." "Still cold?" I asked her, even though she didn't touch the curry I had made. As usual, she completely ignored me. Gradually, I began to feel irritated. "Eat. If you eat, your body will warm up a bit." "I don't want it." I thought she was finally reacting, but this was all she said. Still, her gloomy tone made me feel something was seriously wrong. "I don't know what happened, but," I sternly said to her, "if I hadn't come by, your life might have been in danger. You shouldn't underestimate the mountains." But she just turned her sorrowful profile away from me and remained silent, not trying to speak. I thought I couldn't handle this anymore, so I figured all I could do was let her sleep. "Did she not touch it after all? The curry you made?" "Yeah, she didn't eat it," I told my wife, as I grabbed another can of beer from the fridge. As night fell, the rain and wind became stronger. The sound of rain hitting the windows was loud, and drafts blew in from various spots of the hut. While looking out the window, I asked, "How do you feel? Has it improved a little?" I thought she wouldn't respond, but then I heard her voice, as thin as a mosquito's. "If I lie down like this, by morning, I might." Surprised, I turned to look at her. She was wrapped in the mountain jacket I had lent her, covering herself from head to toe. Once again, I turned my gaze back to the window. Then I muttered, "It feels like I'm stranded in the middle of a storm." Suddenly, I heard the sound of the mountain jacket rustling. I looked at her. She was sitting half upright, staring straight ahead, frozen in place. "Oh, a storm, really? Not at all on the side." My wife chimed in. "Guess so. They're just the mountains." I answered, and my wife urged me to continue the story with a "so." Afterwards, I got into my sleeping bag, but I was having a hard time falling asleep. Then, she who was asleep screamed and jumped up, looking utterly lost. Thinking she might have had a nightmare, I crawled out of my sleeping bag and shook her shoulder. Her body was ice cold. "This jacket alone isn't enough. Hey, you're cold, right?" She gave a small nod and looked at the sleeping bag I had been using. "Can I get in there?" I laid the sleeping bag beside her. "Come on, get inside." She got into the sleeping bag as I told her, her body shaking from the cold. I thought there was nothing else I could do but warm her up. My sleeping bag was not the mummy type that people usually imagine, but the envelope type that's like a blanket folded in half lengthwise. If I left the zipper open, it would somehow accommodate 2. I got into the sleeping bag with her. I'm pretty big body-wise. I hung half my body out of the sleeping bag and moved closer to her. She also snuggled up to me. It's warm. My wife, Michelle, slammed her beer-filled glass onto the table. With that force, the beer splashed out. What? With a woman you barely know, you're telling me you spent the night with her? Yeah. My wife, Michelle, filled with jealousy, trembling with rage, glared at me. Easy there, she's practically sick. Don't jump to conclusions. Even as I said this to my wife, I remembered the words of the woman that had made my heart skip a beat. Warm, come closer. She began to speak softly as she nestled up to me in the sleeping bag. She had lost her husband in a mountain accident that had occurred on this mountain about half a year ago. She didn't know what to do next and, in despair and pessimism about her future, she decided to enter the mountain to follow her husband's footsteps and take her own life. But I couldn't do it. I don't have the courage to live on, but I also didn't have the courage to end it here. As she buried her face in my shoulder, I told her, "Your late husband is probably saying it's too early for you to join him. That's what I believe." I see. Michelle grabbed a tissue and started cleaning up the spilled beer on the table. I recalled the woman who had cried incessantly in my arms. The sensation of her body as she gradually regained her body heat. "But are you sure that's all there was to it?" Michelle asked, peering into my face. I said, "Don't overthink it." Seeing my unsettled reaction, Michelle flashed a mischievous smile. She then headed to the fridge to get another beer and said, "You know what they say about men. When they have something to feel guilty about, they suddenly become nice." She said that my uncharacteristic actions, like buying souvenirs from the mountain I never bought before or becoming a suddenly understanding father, were evidence of my guilt. As she said this, Michelle poured beer into my glass. She then smiled sweetly at me. It seemed that Emily's mood had improved. "You know, I spent the night thinking about this with her. What would happen to you and our son if I had an accident on the mountain?" "Stop it, don't even joke about such a thing." But it wasn't a joke or a lie. I had spent the night with her, seriously considering what would happen to my wife, Michelle, and our son, Tyler, if something happened to me. What if I go first? Would my wife and son even shed a tear for a man like me, a husband like this, a father like this? I pondered. That's why I decided to change my ways. "I wonder how long that'll last," was my wife's skeptical response. The next weekend, I finally fulfilled my promise to my son to take him to the amusement park. I also cut down on my hiking trips. Then, several months later, one evening after dinner, as I was playing games with my son in the living room, my wife, having finished the dishes, suggested, "Hey, next time you go hiking, can Sean and I come with you?" Yeah, sure." Beside me, Sean started making a fuss about how he wanted to go. Why didn't I think of that before? I was at a loss for words. "All right, let's go." For this trip, I chose a beginner's trail and took my wife and son hiking. At one point on the trail, my wife stumbled over a rock and lost her balance. I caught her, and she buried her face in my chest, exclaiming, "This is quite tough." While I held her like that, Sean teased, "Daw, you two are so lovey-dovey." We quickly let go of each other. "We're almost at a rest cabin. Let's take a break there." The cabin was manned with a toilet and a shop. There were a few other hikers resting there. As I walked towards an open seat with my wife and son, I stopped dead in my tracks when I noticed a woman among the other hikers. My wife asked what was wrong. "It's her, the woman I told you about." "Wait, is she?" The one you shared a sleeping bag with. I found myself nodding before I tapped my wife's forehead with my index finger. She chuckled and followed my gaze to the woman. She, too, noticed us. She quickly stood up and bowed her head towards me. And then she noticed us, too. She quickly stood up and bowed her head toward me. Then, she spoke to the man sitting next to her. After which, that man stood up, looked at me, and walked over. I'm her brother-in-law. Her husband, my younger brother, died. I wanted to thank you for the help you gave my sister-in-law at that time. I was urged by him to step outside. Meanwhile, she approached my wife, and they sat down together. According to her brother-in-law, they had just marked the first anniversary of her husband's death. They took that opportunity to visit this mountain, the site of the accident, to pay their respects. Since my brother passed away, she had been withdrawn. My wife and I were concerned, but he never anticipated she would be so desperate as to think of following her late husband. If it weren't for your help, I might have lost her, too. With that, he deeply bowed his head to me. After descending the mountain and getting on the return train, Sean, exhausted from the climb, fell fast asleep. What did you talk about with her? I asked my wife as I stroked Sean's head. Just a normal chat between two women. So what did you talk about? My wife sang a little tune, teasing me. I wondered if she had questioned her about that night at the shelter. Of course, I had nothing to feel guilty about. But I was curious. Hey, tell me. Do you really want to know? My wife grinned at me. Then she spoke. She said you blushed, even at your age, when she asked you to come closer. I remembered that moment, and with no words to return, I just averted my gaze. She apologized for making such a shameless request. She said you were as nervous as a high schooler. My wife laughed out loud at that. I ended up laughing along with her. Our laughter woke up Sean, our son. Sorry for waking you, buddy. You can go back to sleep. You're not cold, are you? I said to him, and my thoughts drifted to her. Just like an alpine flower, you are beautiful. Surely you'll have wonderful encounters ahead. I wish you all the best, just like us, right now. I hope you enjoyed this. Your subscription to our channel really motivates us to create more content. See you in the next video.